The female lead tells women's stories. Remarkable, diverse, inspiring. An educational charity promoting positive female role models who show the many different routes to success and fulfillment.
So often I hear people saying, oh, how do I get started? How do I do this? How do you do it? You just start. You have to begin. And it won't be perfect, and it'll be messy, and it'll be hard. But you're doing something, and you're on your way.
Empowering future generations of women through films. And a book of 60 women donated to 18,000 schools in the UK and USA, reaching millions of young people. And through our female lead societies, we help girls to discover new role models that speak to their passions, ambitions, and careers. Through our research into social media and mental health, we found a solution to the negative impact of social media on teen girls. Through a simple intervention which encouraged girls to follow different influencers, we were able to change their entire social media experience and sense of well-being. We called this campaign Disrupt Your Feed, and it reached 20 million people on social, with 330 million impressions all over the globe. So what's next? As well as inspiring girls, we're now finding ways to measurably improve the lives of older women through data, research, and the stories of those who have overcome challenges and found their own personal versions of success. We're a long way from being finished. Join us in our mission.
Are we going to talk about women's rights again? Yes, we're going to talk about it until there's balance.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Edwina Dunn. I'm the founder of The Female Lead, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the session today, which is going to be all about how to build mental strength. And we have the fabulous Amy Morin, who is going to be sharing her experience, her wisdom, and her suggestions, I guess, for how we all think about life, work, and build our mental strength. So we're going to be talking to her in just a moment. I just want to remind you that there's an opportunity for you to ask questions later on in the session. So I get to talk to Amy first, but then it's over to you. Please do send those in, and we'll make sure we surface some of them towards the end. So let me first tell you a little bit about Amy. She's editor-in-chief at Very Well Mind, a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and psychology lecturer at Northeastern University. She's also an international best-selling author. She's already published 3 books, 13 Things Mentally Strong People, Parents, Women Don't Do. And those have been translated into an amazing 40 languages. And I hear, very excitingly, that she's about to publish her new book, which will be specifically her first book around mental strength for kids. So I guess we can talk about that in just a moment. Most exciting. Now, Amy has been dubbed the self-help guru of the moment. I have just found out, if you look at her in that wonderful setting, that she's actually on a boat in the Florida Keys, which is just quite amazing. And she's worried about the air conditioning, whereas I'm freezing. So that's really fun. Talk about world differences. But, I think, Amy, we are here to learn from you. We are here to learn about you. And I know there are some fantastic stories that you've already shared online that people can dial into. So welcome, Amy. It's a real pleasure to have you on here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Now, my first question is really that, I listened to your TED talk, The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong, and I found it, both moving and utterly compelling. And I clearly was not alone, because there have been an amazing 16 million people who have watched that. So you've reached out to so many people. And my question is, there are so many trained psychotherapists. How come you speak to us so clearly and so powerfully?
Well, thank you. That's a kind question. I think because I speak about my own experiences. I don't really talk that much about exactly what's in the textbook, but instead I can say, this is what worked for me. And I've seen it in anecdotal stories in my therapy office as well about what worked for other people. And sure, there's science behind it and there's studies, and I'm not just making it up. However, I can talk from my own experience. I've been at the bottom of the barrel and had some really dark days in my life. For people who haven't seen my TED Talk, I lost my mother, my husband, and my father-in-law, all in a fairly short period of time. And during that time, the last thing I wanted was a long to-do list. I felt already so overwhelmed, and I was guilty and so sad, and my heart was just broken. The thought of having to add more things to do to my list so that I could feel better or heal my broken heart just seemed overwhelming. So I created a don't do list. And when I was done, I had 13 things that mentally strong people don't do. And I never meant to write a book about it. I had no idea this many years later I'd still be talking about it. Instead, it was a personal letter that I just happened to publish online because it was helpful to me. I thought like 5 or 6 people would read it and maybe it would resonate with one, but 50 million people read that article and it changed the course of my life. Because as a therapist, I discovered that sometimes people would come into my office and they'd gone through tough times and they would get better. And they were still hopeful. They still wanted to make their lives better. But other people were bitter. They were angry and they felt like they could never make their life as good as it could have been had they not been through tough times. And I wanted to know, well, what separates these two groups of people? And one of the things I learned really quickly was it wasn't always about what they did. Sometimes it was more about what they didn't do. People who didn't have certain bad habits thrived. And I thought of it like, sort of like if I went to a physical trainer and I wanted to become physically strong and somebody said, lift some weights and run on the treadmill, that'd be great. But I could do those things all day long and not really see any results if I were eating tons of junk food. Sometimes it's just easier to have somebody say, hey, quit eating all those jelly donuts, quit doing these bad habits, and then your good habits become much more effective. So that was the approach that I took in my own life. And with a lot of the clients that came into my therapy office was, let's take a look at how do we get rid of your worst habit or two. And then all of those things that you're already doing will become much more effective rather than having just one counterproductive bad habit that was holding them back. So I started speaking about my own experience. And as soon as I did, people perked up. They listened. 50 million people read that article. And then I talked about it in my TED Talk. And as you say, 16 million people watched it because I don't want to just tell people this is what I learned in college, but instead I can say, this is what helped me in my own life. And here's why it helped.
Well, you certainly went through some things that would break many hearts. And I think that's why the courage and the resilience that you showed, it means so much. I mean, we're all going through, not the same level of pain, but some degree of pain right now. And I think, we're all keen to understand what can we do? What sort of techniques and skills can we learn that just make us face it in a more positive way, in a more, I suppose, accepting way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a tough time right now. And for people to know that there's a difference between mental strength and mental health. Sometimes people will say, I can't be mentally strong, I have depression, or I'm too weak because I have an anxiety disorder. But those things are two very different things. And if we were to compare it to physical health and physical strength, lifting weights, going to the gym can help you build muscle, but it doesn't guarantee you won't ever get a health problem. Like you might still develop high cholesterol or high blood pressure someday. Mental strength is the same. It's all about the choices that you make. So even though the pandemic has put us in some really strange and bizarre circumstances, there's still things we can do every single day to grow stronger and become better.
And what are some of those things? Because that's tantalizing. You've just sort of shone a light and then stopped.
So mental strength, there's really three parts to it. It's about the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. I'll give you an exercise for each one. When it comes to thinking, it's not about being overly positive. Sometimes people think, oh, just look on the bright side and life gets better. That's not necessarily true. If you're overconfident, you won't work as hard. So you don't want to be overly positive. You want to be realistic. But you need to also recognize that there are some downsides, that sometimes things don't always work out, and that you'll be okay no matter how they work out. So rather than walking into a situation thinking things are always going to turn out great, you might think, well, I might or I might not get the job, but I'll be okay either way. So one of my favorite exercises for changing the way you think is to just practice gratitude. Grateful people are 25% happier. If you write down 3 things you're thankful for before you go to bed, you'll sleep better. Grateful people have better immunity. They live longer. Their health is way better. They have more friends, and they just feel better. Gratitude is really simple. It only takes a minute of your time. So you might say, at the dinner table every night, we're just going to go around and say what we're grateful for. Or maybe you start that gratitude journal, and before you go to bed, you just write down 3 things you're grateful for. But it changes the way that you think. So rather than thinking I deserve better, it really shifts your mindset. So you start to recognize I have more than I deserve. And then the emotional aspect. When it comes to our feelings, we talk so much about knowing about emotional intelligence and recognizing how other people feel. We're not there yet. The truth is, if I ask a room full of people to name as many emotions as they can in 30 seconds, they come up with an average of 5. We aren't good at talking about our feelings because we don't pay much attention to our emotions. So a really quick exercise to get better at that is to just name how you're feeling throughout the day. Maybe when you brush your teeth, if you brush your teeth in the morning and at night, take a minute and say, how am I feeling right now? Studies will show that just naming your emotions takes a lot of the sting out of them. So if you can say, I feel anxious, you automatically feel a little bit less anxious in that moment, or I feel sad. And then the next step is to take a look at how do those emotions affect your choices. When you're really anxious, you'll tend to shy away from doing anything risky, even if it's good for you. If your boss comes to you and says, here's an opportunity, and you're anxious about something else, maybe you're anxious about something going on at home, your anxiety will spill over and you'll say to your boss, no, thank you. So just recognizing how do my emotions, what am I feeling right now, and how might those emotions affect my decisions can go a long way toward helping you be stronger. And the third one is about our behavior. We tend to do things that keep us in the status quo. So if we had a bad day at work, maybe we come home and sit on the couch and just binge watch TV rather than doing something to get us out of that mood. Or when we're really anxious, we sit and worry and think about things in a way that just makes us worry even more. Our brains want us to just keep in whatever mood or whatever state we're in. So sometimes you have to act contrary to how you feel. So you might say to yourself, if I felt happy right now, what would I do? And then do those things. And sometimes that's a really easy way to shift your mood. Or if you say, if you're walking into a job interview and you are really nervous and you're really filled with self-doubt, say to yourself, what would I be doing right now if I felt confident? And you act like the person you want to become. It's not about being fake. It's just about saying, how do I put my best foot forward? And we don't need to be happy all the time. Sometimes people think, well, I always have to be happy. But mental strength isn't about just pretending to be happy or being down on yourself when you're not. It's taking the good with the bad and knowing, okay, I can be sad and that's okay. But to also recognize you don't have to stay stuck there. There's plenty of times where we can pull ourselves out of that place of pain and say, okay, what else can I do right now if it's not serving me well?
There's a lot in there. It feels like you just have to go through that a few times to remember it all, because it's so jam-packed with interesting thoughts and guidance there. One of the things that I heard when you spoke, when I was listening to your TEDx, was going through challenge and pain and kind of accepting the journey through it. Could you just talk to me a bit more about that? I found that really interesting.
Yeah, we're so good at trying to escape pain and numb ourselves and distract ourselves from anything that is uncomfortable. But sometimes you just have to go through those uncomfortable feelings to heal. And if we take grief, for example, nobody wants to experience grief. It's sad, it's hard, it's horrible, but it's the process by which we heal. And you have to go through it in order to allow yourself to feel better on the other side. So, but yeah, as people who live in today's world, we get so good at numbing ourselves with social media. We eat too much, we drink too much, we do things that give us immediate gratification or that take some of the pain away because we think we can't stand it. And part of building mental strength is reminding yourself that even though something's uncomfortable, it's tolerable. And the more that you are willing to tolerate being anxious, being sad, you can build up confidence in yourself that you can handle it. And we all need healthy coping strategies. And with the pandemic, it's taken away a lot of our coping skills. People can't go to the gym, or they can't see their friends and family. They can't get out and enjoy the activities that usually keep them in a healthy space. So you have to get a little creative. You might say, I'm going to watch a movie with my family on Friday night. I'm going to work out in my living room. I'm going to go for a walk outside around the block if it's safe to do that. But just really dig deep and say, what can I do? Because I'm hearing from so many people who say, all right, I started eating way too much. Now I've gotten in this bad habit, or I just binge watch TV and I don't feel good about myself. What can I do? And people are drinking and scrolling through social media mindlessly. All of these things that no matter how many good habits you have, it just takes sometimes one or two that will keep you stuck. So to recognize what coping strategies aren't working well, what ones aren't serving me, which ones are introducing new problems into my life, and what can I do instead? And now is a great time to experiment with different strategies. Maybe you discover that you like puzzles, or you enjoy knitting, or you go back to some hobbies that you used to do years ago but haven't had a chance to do, and just figure out what kind of things help me calm myself down, cheer myself up, regulate my mood in a healthy way.
Yeah, I tried a couple. I tried drawing and painting, but I remembered I had no talent whatsoever. So I've had to pull back from that one. So this is really interesting that you've created a book now for children. And I noticed that you called it Mentally Strong Thing Kids Do rather than Don't Do. So I thought that was quite an interesting slant.
Yeah, we decided to take a twist on this one. So whereas my first three books are about what not to do, this one is called 13 Things Strong Kids Do. Because if we teach kids from a young age how to build mental strength, they won't go on to develop a lot of those bad habits that the rest of us did when we grow up. So my goal was to help kids know right now, how do you build mental muscle? What exercises work? What strategies can you use so that you don't get into those bad habits? Most of us were never taught about how to regulate our emotions, or what to do when we have worried thoughts, or how to do something we don't want to do. How do you push yourself? And I kept hearing from readers of my adult books, if only I had learned this sooner. If I had learned this earlier in my life, the entire course of my life might have been different. So I really wanted to write a kid's book that would say, okay, well, here's how you can start developing healthy habits now, and here are the things that you can do. And I know kids are told all the time, no, and don't do this. They already have enough of that anyway. So I wanted to write a to-do book that would say, if you start doing these things right now, I guarantee as an adult, you won't develop a lot of those bad habits that the rest of us did.
That's really nice. And I think, a lot of parents who are homeschooling at the moment, it's really nice to have something which is, here are all the great things you can learn to do. I mean, that's a really positive contribution, isn't it? That we can all share and give. And I think it's April it comes out, right?
It does. It goes on sale April 6th, and we're got a bunch of pre-order bonuses right now for anybody who wants to buy it, because I'm hoping that lots of people will go out and buy it, because right now we're seeing that kids' mental health is worse than it's ever been. We tend to talk about the pandemic in terms of how it's affecting us as adults, but we forget that the kids are really struggling. In fact, it's the Mental Health America just did a study and found that the group of people who are most likely to be depressed right now are 11 to 17-year-old kids, that they're struggling too. And so the timing of this, I'm hoping, will be really good, so that parents will have some tools and strategies to help kids deal with all of the uncertainty and all the constant changes that they're going through, and the sadness from not being able to do their activities or see their friends.
Well, we at the Female Lead love what you're doing, Amy. I mean, this is an important step, and it's wonderful that you're doing something that can help those young kids going through this, because it's a worry, it's a concern for all of us. Now, there should be some questions coming. I'm just going to give Lauren a chance to surface some of those. What are the sort of unhealthy beliefs we have about ourselves while we're waiting for those questions? What sort of things do we say about ourselves, Amy, that are really destructive?
A lot of our unhealthy habits come from an unhealthy belief. When you think, oh, I'm not good enough, I guarantee you'll develop all sorts of really unhealthy habits in life. When you believe I don't succeed, I can't succeed, I don't belong here. So often people, when they do succeed, they think it's a luck, or my boss overestimated me, or they just tend to feel really bad about where they are. And as women, you can often see how this comes out in the way that we respond to compliments. That women are really bad, and some men too, but women in general are bad at accepting compliments. When somebody says to you, gosh, you did a really good job in that meeting today, we're much more likely to pass it off and say, oh no, it was nothing. Or we say somebody else did all the work, I just showed up. Or we give really quick to give a compliment back. When somebody says, I really like your shoes, we might be really quick to say, oh, I really love your pants, just because we feel bad about accepting a compliment. And so one thing we can do is just say thank you, and to know that you aren't bragging or anything like that. And it feels uncomfortable sometimes because our belief about ourselves doesn't match up with the way other people see us. When they say nice things to us, sometimes we think, I don't deserve this, and it affects us. But if you just practice saying thank you when you get a compliment, it's a great way to start chipping away at those unhealthy beliefs we have about ourselves.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, here we go. So this is from Kristen. What can parents of toddlers do during quarantine to build mental strength in them?
So toddlers is a time where you just want to start introducing some really simple, like, feeling words. So when your toddler throws a tantrum, you might be able to say, I know you're really angry, or I see you're really frustrated. And you can start teaching them a little bit about the difference between feelings and behavior. It's okay to be mad. It's not okay to have a tantrum where you're screaming in the middle of the grocery store. And the way that we teach them that is by removing them from the situation, by making it clear that you aren't going to give them attention for misbehavior. But as soon as they're good and they're quiet and they're doing what you asked them to do, give them lots of praise and attention for that. So I think it's really just about how we start introducing feeling words, separating behavior from feeling, and reinforcing the good choices that they're making.
Separating behavior and feeling. Great. Barbara asks, how do you stop anxiety?
So the first thing is to not try to stop it. The more we think, I can't have anxiety, I can't tolerate it, I have to get rid of it, the worse it becomes. So part of that is just accepting, all right, I have anxiety sometimes, but if you treat it more like it's a nuisance, like it's annoying, like maybe a headache is, it won't be quite so powerful in your life. And then two other things you might do. One is to learn how to calm your brain and your body. In my kids' book, I actually have an exercise called Smell the Pizza, really quick breathing exercise that I think adults will gain stuff from too. Just about breathing in through your nose like you're smelling a piece of pizza, and then you breathe out through your mouth like you're cooling the piece of pizza. Doing that, it just helps calm your brain, calms your body. So when your anxiety is really high, it doesn't feel like it's freaking out. Another strategy is if you worry a lot, it sounds ridiculous, but it works. Schedule time to worry. For people who worry all day long and they're constantly worrying, it's really helpful. There's science behind this. I'm not just making it up, but to set aside 15 minutes a day to worry. So maybe 7 to 7:15 is your worrying time. When that time rolls around, sit down, write down your worries, think about them, whatever you want to do. But when your time's up, you say, all right, time's up, and go do something else to distract yourself for a few minutes. Whenever you catch yourself worrying outside of that time, you remind yourself, it's not time to worry yet. I'll worry about that later. And if you practice that consistently over the course of a few weeks, I guarantee you won't worry nearly as much. People will find that they're able to contain their worrying to just a small chunk of their day. So somebody who used to worry all the time will say, I can concentrate now. My brain feels much better. I'm not so distracted all the time because I know I can still worry about this. It's just going to be on a limited basis.
Okay, Alka Sharma asks, I'm really struggling to keep my motivation going on now. On nowadays in lockdown, forgive me. What adults should do to keep their mental strength and help them to keep going?
Yeah, you're not alone in that. Being home and not going out, and after a while, our days start to blend together. But I'll give you two strategies that can help with lack of motivation. One is write yourself a list. If there's something specific that you're struggling with, say working out, or maybe it's working, just sitting down and doing your work, create a list of all the reasons why you should do it. And then when you're sitting on the couch and you're tempted to just watch TV or you don't want to do that thing, read over your list, because our emotions tend to talk us out of doing something. So when you're sad, you're bored, you're lonely, your brain will say, you'll do that later. Don't do it. Sit here and don't move. But when you read over that list, it kind of balances out your emotions with your rational brain. So then you can say, all right, here are 10 reasons why I should get up and go do that thing right now. So that's one way to change how you're thinking about it. But to actually do it, another strategy is to use the 10-minute rule. So let's say you're just not motivated to clean the house. Tell yourself, I'm going to do it for 10 minutes. And maybe even set the timer. But when the 10-minute mark rolls around, give yourself permission to quit. If you really hate it, you don't have any energy and you don't want to do it, take a break. But most of the time, probably 99% of the time, the hardest part is getting going. Once you do something for 10 minutes, it's much easier to keep going. But we tend to think, cleaning the whole house seems like it's such a big project, or going to the gym, or working out, or sitting and writing this boring report. I can't do it. So we put it off and we put it off. But if you just start it for 10 minutes, it can then help you say, all right, if I can do it for 10 minutes, I'll keep going. Most of the time you'll keep going once you get to the 10-minute mark, but it just kind of helps your brain break it down into a more manageable task to begin with.
It rings really true. I think sometimes, when you're about to go out for a walk and you go, I don't want to, it's cold and it's wet. You don't want to go, but you never regret having been out, ever. I don't
Exactly. If you can push yourself to give it a try, it's not so bad.
Sorry, I talked over Mariana here. What can one do to identify and overcome the imposter syndrome, feeling constantly like one doesn't belong, especially in a room full of self-confident, competitive people?
So imposter syndrome is a real problem, right? There's situations where when good things happen to us, again, we chalk it up to luck, or we think other people overestimated us. We think, I don't know enough to be here. And then it leads to all sorts of really unhealthy behaviors. Sometimes people become perfectionists, or they just end up working 22 hours a day to try to keep up. So 2 strategies that can help with imposter syndrome. One is write yourself a kind letter. And then whenever you have doubt, read over that letter. It can be a letter that just reminds you, you got here because of your hard work. You have the knowledge, you have the skills. Your brain's going to try to trick you into thinking that you don't sometimes, but here's some evidence that is to the contrary. Other people have recognized you. It's not just one person that got you to be where you are now. I guarantee that lots of people have recognized your skills and your talents. So just write that down. And when you're filled with doubt, you take that letter out of your pocket and you read it to yourself. And it just helps shift some of those thoughts that are going through your brain where you're questioning yourself. And to know, too, that other people aren't as confident as they look. People are going to probably thinking the same thing about you, like, oh, she has it all together. So that's one thing you can do. A second strategy that I love for imposter syndrome is to mentor someone else. When you mentor a new hire or somebody who's maybe still in college, it will remind you of how far you've come and how much you know. When they start asking you questions, when they're looking for help, and you can answer their questions and you can give them information and feedback, you'll have a little boost of thinking, oh yeah, I do know what I'm talking about. One of the best things I ever did for my career was I started teaching college classes. Because I had that as a therapist at times, like, who am I to say, or how do I know this? Or so many other seasoned therapists know what they're doing. I became a college professor, and while I was still working as a therapist, and suddenly I realized as I was teaching other people, gosh, this makes it so I can recognize I have come a long way. I didn't know these things 10 years ago, or I have so much information now that I didn't have when I was a college student. So I'm smarter than I give myself credit for sometimes. So I think mentoring somebody else can just really help you see that you do have the skills and knowledge, even though your brain's trying to tell you otherwise.
It's a really nice way of putting it. Brilliant. Of the 13 things to stop doing to build mental strength, are there 2 or 3 you recommend we start with?
The biggest one I would say to start with is to not give away your power. So whenever you are tempted to say something like, my mother-in-law drives me crazy, or my boss makes me work late, take that back and remind yourself that nobody's making you do anything. Nobody is making you think, feel, or behave in any certain way. It's all about the choices that you make, and that you can set healthy boundaries and just change your language in a way that reflects the fact that you're empowered to live your life the way that you want. That's a big one. And the other one, if I had to recommend a second one, it's that mentally strong people don't feel sorry for themselves. And it's okay to be sad. It's okay to let yourself grieve. But there's a big difference between sadness and self-pity. When we host a pity party, we start to think that everybody's problems are smaller than ours, and that we have no ability to deal with them and that we can't cope. And we convince ourselves that we're hopeless, helpless, worthless. The list could go on and on. So it's just about recognizing that even though things might be tough, you have the skills, the resources, the capability to get through it. Even though you might not feel like it, there's always something you can do to make your life or somebody else's life better. Sometimes that means asking for help. Sometimes it just means acknowledging that you are feeling stuck. But about reaching out, talking to people, and figuring out, how do I make sure that I'm not just digging in my heels and chalking it up to my life is too bad and awful to make anything different.
Very good. How do I help a friend who needs mental strength?
One of the best things you can do is just live by example. None of us like to be lectured. So if you tell somebody else, this is what you should do, or here's the things you should try, it's probably not going to work. But when you can say to somebody, I started doing this and it changed my life, other people might be more interested in hearing more. They might want to know, how'd you do that? Or how can I apply that to my own life? So I always say, encourage people by talking about what works in your life, showing them the things that you're doing, and be open to being vulnerable as well, and still talking about some of the struggles that you have. We don't want to have friends who are perfect and who think that they have it all figured out. But if you can say, I'm struggling with this, here's what I'm trying, other people might be more open to saying, yeah, I'm going to try this in my life too.
I always worry a little that if you share your story, you're taking away from their story. Is that part of a challenge?
Well, nobody wants a one-upper. So when your friend says, gosh, my pay got cut in half, and you're all, oh yeah, well, my pay got cut by 2/3. Nobody wants to say whose life is worse. But at the same time, talking about our own struggles often opens the door for other people. I know in my life as a therapist, I wasn't going to share my story. When my list of the 13 things came out, it was literally just the list. Nobody knew the backstory of why I wrote it. And I had no intentions of ever telling anyone. And there's interviews to this day where they were asking me, like, how'd you know these things? And I was like, well, I'm a therapist. I just know this. I was on Forbes had interviewed me 4 days after my father-in-law passed away. They had no idea that this was a personal list. And it took some courage and some encouragement from other people to say, share your story. And as soon as I did, everything changed. And I thought people would lose respect for me, because how can you be a therapist and you're struggling with these things? But the opposite happened. Once I shared my story, people thought, oh, you're a real human being and who struggles as well. You don't have all the answers. You're still dealing with these things too. So I think quite often when we share our struggles, people can relate to it and they're more open to talking about it.
Yeah. Okay, how much does positive thinking have to do with building mental strength?
So I'm not like a huge proponent of positive thinking. I think it's positive thinking that often ruins our mental strength. When you walk into a job interview and you're thinking, I'm going to nail this, you might not prepare for it, or you may not be prepared if you don't get the job. So I think it's about realistic thinking. And so often well-intentioned people say things like, something good will come out of this, or it wasn't meant to be, or always look on the bright side. Well, no, sometimes things are bad, and it's okay to accept that and to acknowledge, yeah, I'm really struggling here. You don't need to always pretend like everything's perfect. You don't need to think about all the happy stuff in the world. It's okay sometimes to not be positive. And I think that there's something called toxic positivity, and being overly positive can do more harm than good sometimes.
So in a way, showing our flaws kind of makes us a bit stronger, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Being open to saying, here are my weaknesses, I need help sometimes, ask questions, all of those things takes a lot more strength to do that than to pretend like we have it all figured out.
Yeah. Honestly, amazing, Amy. Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. It goes in a heartbeat, doesn't it? I could listen to you for a lot longer. But thank you so much for what you shared. And before I say a final thank you and goodbye, I just want to mention that if I find the right piece of paper, that we have next week. The session is all about get good with money. Very important, get good with money. And that's with Tiffany Alish, also known as the Budgetnista. It's very difficult to say. But she's apparently America's favorite financial educator. So I look forward to talking to Tiffany. I'll put my teeth back in by then. Until then, thank you all. Thank you to our fabulous audience as ever. And Amy, thank you so much. You are amazing.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.